Hello, everyone. We're going to now have a series on Paul's usage of the Greek word pistis, which is generally thought to be faith, meaning of faith in some facts. Or could he be using it for the word obedience? Or could he be using it for the word trust? So this is part one, and this is really just to inform ourselves and get ourselves, even though we don't maybe know classical Greek, we can always be looking up lexicons and then ourselves double checking whether what we're reading is correctly being translated. And we may learn something out of this, and we won't know until we go through it, right? So let's see what we can learn. Now, today we're not going to look at a lot of dictionaries, but I wanted to remind those people who are not familiar with this that the word pistis and its related verb is pisteuo, comes from a demon, a fairy really, so don't think negative thoughts necessarily. But in Greek mythology, you can have good demons and you can have bad demons. And a good demon was the Pistis. And you see a kind of a bronze statue of a demon, and that's not necessarily Pistis, but that would give you an idea. You know, they would have wings and be little pixies. Think of pixies like that. And she was and I'm going to read this to you. She was the personified spirit or daimona of trust, honesty, and good faith. She's one of the good spirits to escape Pandora's box and promptly fled back to heaven, abandoning mankind. Her Roman name was Fides, so there was a Roman corresponding god system, and they called her Fides. And you get fidelity and those kind of words from that. And her opposite number was apate, would be deception, and logoi is lies. So these were symbolic little pixies, and some are bad, some are good, and she's the good one. And so that kind of gives you an idea that this is not somebody who believes in facts. That's not her main characteristic. She's not credulous. She's not gullible. That's not her nature at all. She is somebody who is simply trustworthy, honest, and as a servant, she would be completely obedient if you had to imagine her that way. So this character from the beginning has very little in common with the way pistis is generally thought in Christian circles to have its meaning. So the meaning in Greek is barely anywhere close to being commonly what you think it is. You think it's commonly faith. So we're going to see how often does Paul actually use pistis to mean faith versus something else. Okay, we're going to study Romans 3:3 to just see how Paul uses the word pistis in this sentence. And we're going to look at one particular position of the word pistis in this sentence, and that's the highlighted bold. Did you see that here? Pistis. So this is American Standard Version, and it reads, "For what if some were without faith? Shall their want of faith make of none effect the faithfulness or pistis of God?" Okay, so what would be the alternatives? So if we said it was the faith of God, so does God have faith in himself, right? So that's how Paul is usually thought to be talking. He's talking about our faith in God. Well, God would not have a faith in himself, right? He wouldn't talk about himself in those terms. Nor would we translate it as trust, because the trust of God, he doesn't have a trust in himself. He is God. He doesn't have to trust himself. So those meanings are ruled out. So one of the good things about doing a breakdown of things like this is you can rule out meanings that are nonsensical because they could not be directed toward God himself. He has neither faith in himself nor trust in himself. He is self-existent and he is all-powerful. So the only meaning it makes sense, and even in context, is the word faithfulness. Okay, so that would be kind of like him keeping his word. Okay, so faithfulness. Okay, so we'll continue, but I'm going to pause here. Okay, so now faithfulness means consistent righteous behavior when we talk about human faithfulness. And God can have that same characteristic of being consistently righteous and not breaking his promises and just be faithful. And so I have here, it is comparable to the human activity of faithfulness towards God. Now, another concept of faithfulness is obedience. Now, God isn't going to be obedient to himself, but keeping his word is kind of God's reciprocal, similar activity to what we can do. So we would call it obeying God. He would say it would be keeping his promise to be merciful every morning and, whatever. So he would have a similar consistency of his behavior, keeping his word, while if we were to use it towards ourselves, we would more likely say we are being obedient to God by being a consistent, righteous person. So faithfulness is a term that when we apply it to human activity, we could translate it as obedient, okay? But with God, we wouldn't say that. We'd say it'd be consistent, righteous behavior. Okay, so one comment on Romans 3:3 is insightful. It seems quite clear to me that Paul does not mean by pistis what Luther meant by glaube, which is faith, meaning faith in facts. Pistis can certainly mean faith or trust, but it can also mean faithfulness, as it must in Romans 3:3. So again, this is a logic puzzle, meaning you can eliminate faith, you can eliminate trust, and then you're left with the only meaning left at the end is faithfulness, which I said when applied to humans, if it was the faithfulness of a human being, we're talking about the obedience of that person. But when you talk about God's faithfulness, it's the keeping or honoring of his word and staying within his righteous nature. Okay, we're going to pause. Okay, and now we're going to learn one more thing about what's going on here. Can you see this down here? For what if someone faithful? The unfaithfulness or Apistia will not make the faithfulness of God useless, will it? It's the American literal translation. So we're going to learn another word here that doesn't fit the paradigm that pistis always means faith. So what we have here is we're going to learn using what we've figured out with the word pistis. We're going to learn what Apistia means in this sentence. So we've translated correctly the pistis of God to be the faithfulness of God. So now there's going to be a contrast or an opposite. So you just add the letter A in front of pistis and you get Apistia. Okay, so here, now knowing what pistis means, you will be able to deduce how is the word Apistia is used. And so I'm trying to educate every reader here, every person on this website. Greek uses contrasts to show what the meaning of a word is. So if I say pistis in the same sentence I say Apistia, I intend that to be in contrast because they are the letter A in front of Apistia is the negative of the root word there, which is really pistis, but for whatever reason it's Apistia here. Okay, so that's so now let me explain this. So ordinarily, and in the ASV quote above, it has Apistia as want of belief. So if we go back up here, let me see here. So see how they translated it, want of faith? Now this is not really correct because Paul is trying to contrast the faithfulness of God against the Apistia of men. Their want of faith. Whose faith? Mankind. So he's talking about we have the want of. He is saying we lack pistis, and we're Apistia. So he's contrasting that against the faithfulness of God. So now you gotta say the ASV did not do this correctly because it's not taking into account it translated pistis as faithfulness there. So we'll have to show it to you. It's harder to explain. So ASV translates Apistia as want of belief. Yet this is wrong. It mismatches the direct contrast to the pistis of God. Thus, Apistia, formed by the negative prefix a in Greek in front of pistis, should be seen as the contrast to the pistis of God. Thus, the pistis of God, which has to mean faithfulness of God, right? We eliminated the idea of its faith or trust of God in himself. It's being contrasted to Apistia. So obviously, it's talking about the unfaithfulness of men. So now listen to it. And this is what another translation picked up. So, people get better and better at this, and so they're getting better and better. So this is translated correctly in the American literal translation. For what if some were unfaithful? Their unfaithfulness, their apistia, will not make the faithfulness of God useless, will it? Okay, Romans 3:3. So now we have a better idea of what the word pistis means, because now we see it's actually contrasted with unfaithfulness. Or what's another synonym for unfaithfulness? Disobedience. So the disobedience of man will not make the faithfulness of God, because God is not going to be obedient to himself, but his nature for goodness and keeping his word would be, we render it as faithfulness. So this is a perfectly translated, those two words are translated correctly. And now we're learning a completely different meaning when you're told pistis means faith. No, 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 no. It doesn't always mean faith. It can mean obedience when spoken about us, and you can translate it as faithful or faithfulness when it's about human beings, but the synonym for that is obedient, okay? But with God, we'd always keep it as faithfulness, because, of course, God is not obedient to himself. So, okay, so I'm going to pause it here, and we're going to go to the next little section here. Okay, so now the next point I was going to make here is that there is even one more key within this verse that makes certain Apistia means unfaithful in the sense of disobedient. Where the ALT has if some were unfaithful, the Greek verb is episteo. This combines the negative prefix a with pisteuo. Now we have all learned about that, right? So with regard to people, pisteuo, as means what? It means to obey unto. But it can mean can mean faith in if it's pisteuo en, and so on. So there are multiple meanings of pisteuo. But here we have the Pisteuo is in a sentence. This combines the negative prefix a with Pisteuo, which latter verb, Pisteuo, we found in John 3:16. When the prefix and verb are so combined, the word means in ancient Greek either option, to disobey or disbelieve. So Episteo is much more readily known to be defined in dictionaries as disobey and or disbelieve. Now, the truth is that should be the same for Pisteuo. Instead, they do everything they can not to translate or give you a meaning of Pisteuo that says obey. But when they get to Episteo, they're fine to tell you it means disobey or disbelieve. Okay, just one of those quirky things that bothers me, but nobody else seems to care. So anyway, in context, one can see here it means disobey. The ALT changed this into were unfaithful. Okay, so it does mean disobey, unfaithful, right? But it should really be disobey. So I say here, while it's satisfactory, another more precise meaning that fits the context is disobey. Okay, so this is just taking one verse, and we've been able to discern a lot of truth out of one verse, how Paul was using it. He was using pisteuo in a negative sense to mean disobey, and it's just an English quirk. We would say you could translate it without using the word disobey. You could just say unfaithful. But he knows pisteuo. That means Paul knows pisteuo means obey. He knows when you don't have the a in front of it, it means obey, because it's being used episteo by his own hand to mean disobey. Do you see that? So now he knows what pisteuo means because he knows what episteo means. Okay, with this background, now look at the entire passage with the underlying Greek verbs and nouns here exposed. Here we see pistis, epistia, and episteo all dancing around, giving us an entirely different concept about pistis and pisteuo in other contexts. Here, pistis certainly is not talking about belief as a mental sense, for God does not have that about himself. The pistis of God is contrasted with the disobedient, unfaithful behavior of men. So here's the ALT with a bit of my change in brackets. For what if some episteoed, disobeyed, their apistia, unfaithfulness, or you could translate it disobedience, will not make the pistis or faithfulness of God useless, will it? Romans 3:3. So that would be a reasonable translation. Thus the pistis of God is the faithful, righteous behavior of God. Paul teaches it is not useless merely because men are disobedient and unfaithful. Hence, pistis certainly in this context meant faithfulness with an emphasis on righteous behavior. We know this because it is contrast against disobedient behavior. We also saw that Episteo meant not obeying here, which re-emphasizes that Pisteuo should ordinarily be translated to mean obey in the New Testament. Okay? So this confirms what I was telling you about Pisteuo eis, and even just simply the word Pisteuo could and should often be translated as obey. And this is radical, right? But you can see it's correct reading of the Greek. Even you know, and not that you have the in-depth education just by me saying these things, but you can see it makes sense. Okay, what I'm saying makes sense as I'm going through it. I hope you can see that. All right. So we're going to stop this little screen capture right now. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm going to stop it there so you can just not have to go through another verse right away. And we're going to do another passage. And I hope by doing this that you will have a greater understanding of what proves when we're saying that John 3:16 and John repeatedly is using these words to mean obey unto Jesus. It's not anomalous. I just showed you in a verse where all the verbs and nouns are using this root word of pistis into verb form, episteo, or another kind of noun, apistia, and then pistis. So you are seeing the variety of meanings in just one sentence. Okay, so we're going to go to another passage of Paul, and we're going to keep showing you these things so that you can get familiar, that you can even say Paul doesn't use these words the way you think they have to always mean. They can mean disobedience, they can mean unfaithfulness, and so on. All right, so we're going to get to another verse later. I'm going to probably call it part 2, so you might want to look out for it, but it might have the name of the passage that we're going to be doing. So I hope everybody had a good time going through this, and God bless. Take care. Ciao, bye.